Hey guys, welcome to home church. Literally in probably the worst room of my home. I'll show you here. I'm redoing a bathroom up here, but possibly the quietest room as well, which is why I'm here. The kids are on fall break, so it makes sense that everything in our lives would fall apart during the same week. But here we are. We started the book of Philippians last week. Every time I open a new book of the Bible, I think, oh, I should do a chapter a week. But it turns out that a verse a week would be more appropriate. So last week we talked about how this church started and this, is this crazy group of people. Acts 16 details the story. People that became Paul's very best friends. He calls them his partners in the gospel. And I've just come to love that word because those people for me are my very closest friends. People who partner with me towards the same work that I give my life, my heart, my everything I've got towards. So partners in the gospel. So this week, Paul, I'm going to kind of tag back into that prayer from last week. Paul's praying for his very best friends, his closest buddies, his partners in the gospel. And he starts like this. Philippians 1:9, if you have your Bibles, he says, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless." Okay, so this is really important. So Paul is praying that love for his closest friends would abound or overflow would be another way to say that, or spill out or be uncontained. And he's confident that this abounding love will lead to knowledge, to insight, to wisdom, which will give one the ability, one with the love, of course, the ability to discern what is best. All right, I need to overemphasize this before we get into anything today. Where does this discernment come from? Who has it? Who has this discernment, this insight to know what is best? It's the one, says Paul, that's overflowing with love. Again, if you can interpret, the book of Revelation, seems like everybody's giving that book a shot, as if it's not the most complicated book in the entire Bible. If you can interpret the book of Revelation, but you're not overflowing, you're not spilling out, you're not abounding with love, Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, would later say, get out of here. You might as well be beating a clanging gong. Listen, love rises to the top. So if someone's morality or political views or religious affiliation just makes you angry, Paul would tell you, you don't need more knowledge. We all think if they just knew this, or if they would read this book, or listen to this person, if they would only be intelligent. We do, don't we? We think if only they had this information, then they would change. But Paul is like, no, you don't need more knowledge. You don't need to win people over with your book or your podcast or your intellectual views or whatever. You don't need more knowledge. You need more love. You don't primarily need to teach someone better. You primarily need to love someone better. So Paul prays that love would overflow. Oh, please catch that. Please hear that. That's what I'm praying for you. Like literally today I sat down and I prayed that love would overflow in our church. Because love always rises to the top. I love it. So that's the intro today. It's just these words of Paul, and he prays Philippians 1:9. This is my prayer, that your love, that your what? That your love may abound more and more. So, at home church, if your group wants to get into the Greek word elakrines, it's kind of a neat word. It's the word that we, in this passage, translate purity from. It comes from sunshine and judge and this idea of sifting in a sieve. I think I'm saying that right. If you want to get into that, faultless, blameless, go for it. It's kind of a fun word study. But I'm going to move on because there's a lot of material to cover. There's things that we worry about. There's things that we stress about and feel anxiety about, fears that we hold. And I want to actually give a quick example for this. So you can rank these. I'm going to give you 4 things. You can rank them in your head. I'm not going to pause and, well, there's no way to ask you. Your small group could. You could hit pause and you guys, your home church, could actually discuss these. But here's the 4 things, okay? And I want you to rank these in order of which one is scarier. 1, getting a flat tire. That kind of freaks me out because none of the wheels of my cars will come off. They're all too old and rusted. So 1, getting a flat tire. 2, having the IRS call you. Okay, remember, which one is scarier? Flat tire, IRS. 3, a possible layoff in your job or business. So flat tire, IRS, possible layoff. 4, going to prison. All right, not even close, right? If you're like me, the first 3, you kind of wrestle with those. You're like, I don't know if I'd rather have a flat tire or the IRS. And then you hear prison and you're like, oh, give me all 3. I don't want to go to prison. How scary would it be to go to prison, to have your freedom taken away, to be put in clothes that aren't yours, to be tossed in a community of offenders where you knew no one? Anyone want to sign up for that? Not me. Prison is not fun by all accounts, and I've known a few people that can give me good accounts. Not one of the places I want to go. In fact, it's probably one of the worst scenarios I can think of. And and I know, this isn't new. Prison has never been a good place. I wonder how much of this fear haunted the first Christians, the first followers of Jesus, this anxiety, this dread. I mean, they were at risk of being taken almost all the time. Now in Rome, prison wasn't a punishment. We had that genius idea. Prison was a place you were just held until you could be punished or tried. So it was like a pre-punishment, I suppose. How many nights had this young church, the Church of Jesus, laid awake wondering if tomorrow would be the day, that they would be taken, that they would be held captive until they were tried or punished? Like, it's one thing. I had a flat tire this week. It's one thing to worry about a flat tire. I also had a key get lost. Not my fault. It's one thing to worry about those things or a bill that you can't pay. It's a whole nother jam, man. To have your best friend go to prison. Have your pastor go to prison. To wonder if you'll be taken to prison. This is where I want to turn you to Philippians 1:12. Because, this is Paul's situation. We talked about this last week. Paul's in prison and he's writing to his favorite church, his favorite group of people. And he says, I want you to know. This is found in Philippians 1:12. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters. That's Paul's way of saying, friends. I want you to know that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace garden to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It's this first part. What has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. that I really want to focus on today. This is just like, I mean, there's like half empty glass people, and then there's glass half full people. Did I say that right? And Paul's like, my glass is spilling over. I don't know what things he worried about, what things kept him up at night or made him anxious, but this has to be on the top of the list. I mean, he's captured, he's taken prisoner, but because he's a Roman citizen, he could request a hearing with Rome, which he did, and then he was moved into his own housing with his own personal guard. Acts 28 lays out the details of Paul's captivity if you want to follow or check out that chapter, read along. So he's in this situation, he's in prison, he's literally handcuffed to another man. And he goes, ha 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 ha, this right here, this is advancing the gospel. What's happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. At which point, his friends have to be like, dude, are you insane? And the answer, of course, is, well, sort of. He's obsessed, man. He is so fixated and fascinated and focused on something bigger than himself. It drowned out every worry, every fear, every anxiety he might have had. See, I was free and I got to pick who to share the gospel with. And I'm like, hey, Paul, yeah, I know, but now you're in prison. To which Paul would say, I know, and it's even better. See, there were some that I couldn't reach before. There were people I didn't have access to, namely the palace guard. And now check it out. I'm tied to the wrist of one of those guys. Let's go. Is what makes Philippians come alive to me, just thinking about this situation that Paul was in. This palace guard, without going into a lot of details, these guys were kingmakers. They were retired soldiers. There were over 20,000 of them. They ended up becoming the personal guards of the emperors. They were this militia that was unstoppable. They were unified and they had tremendous amount of influence. We know from a Greek word in Ephesians that Paul was literally strapped to the wrist of one of the most powerful of these palace guards. They would have taken shifts. Paul would have been allowed to have visitors. He's looking at this and he's like, man, this is a good setup. Prison, for me, has actually served to advance the gospel. Ho, 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 ho. By the way, sharing the gospel is not what we often think of. This isn't trying to convince someone to believe how you believe or to join your religion. When Paul says sharing the gospel, he's talking about sharing the good news that God offers life and freedom and forgiveness and flourishing. That God. That's something else, says Paul. This God isn't how you pictured or how you painted him. He's for you, he's with you, and he is good. As if that wasn't enough, his buddies saw his imprisonment. They saw the impact and the reality. And so Paul's like, hey, look, not only is this advancing the gospel, but it's helping people's fears fade away. His friends are like, oh, I guess it's not that big a deal. The result is that they became even bolder in sharing the gospel themselves. Again, the gospel is not trying to convince someone to believe how you believe, to join your religion, or why they're wrong, or their lifestyle or religion is wrong. It's nothing like that. For Paul, for Peter, for the early Christians, it's sharing the good news that God offers life and freedom and forgiveness and flourishing. That God is not how people pictured him or painted him for years and years and years. That God is for you, he is with you, and most of all, that God is good. This isn't a case of some guy putting a good spin on things. I mean, Paul is thrilled about this, and he can't help but share it. That's why he says, I want you to know that what has happened has actually served to advance the gospel. So here we go. First question. How has what has happened to you served to advance the gospel? Talk about that. You know, maybe even make a list. What has happened to you over the last 6 months? What things have you been kept from doing? What things have been added to your life? What has happened to you over the last 6 months, 8 months, 2 or 3 months? What has happened to you, and how has that served to advance the gospel? And if it hasn't, how can it? How can you turn that around? How can you lean into that? You know, you have influence. I don't know if you know this. You do. You have a platform. You have influence that I don't have, that your home church leader doesn't have. You go places every day that I can't go. You walk into doors that are closed to me. So, simple question. Are you engaging? Are you inviting others in? Are you chaining yourself to the wrist of people in your life and advancing the gospel, carrying the gospel down the field? How has what happened to you actually served to advance the gospel? That's the first question. And then Paul says, because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. So, second question. Whose life leads you to greater confidence? Whose life, because you've seen them, you've heard them, you've been around them, you've experienced them, you're like, I'm getting after it the way they do. Whose life leads you to share the gospel? And then, third question. What in your life is helping others become more confident? What's going on around you in your world where you know that people are looking at you and they're like, man, because of this guy, because of this lady, what do I have to fear? I see it. It works. It's happening. The gospel is advancing. So home church, start there. Make a plan, would you? There's no guilt in this. You know, if you're someone who is completely, or maybe you feel this way, it's probably not even true, but if you feel like you have just like hidden the gospel in your own heart and not actually advanced it at all, today's your day. There's no guilt. There's no point in that. There's no point in saying, oh, I've wasted this time, or I've, for 6 months I've done nothing. That doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve the church. It doesn't serve God. It actually probably just hinders you. Because at least in me, in my own life, if you're like me, when I have guilt weighs me down and I'm like, what's the point? I haven't done it before. Why would I do it now? No. Set that voice aside. That does not serve you or anyone. Today is the day. Make a plan. Like, hey, this is the situation you're in. This is the situation I'm in. How do we use it? How do we lean into it? You know, my wife lost a very expensive van key Monday. It kind of sabotaged our whole fall break. We didn't end up getting to go where we were going to go. And today I had a locksmith out, and I was pretty grumpy about it. It's hundreds of dollars to have this key made for this van. But I'm like, Shackleford, I can be grumpy and turn that anger towards the locksmith, or I can invite him in. I can laugh about it and be like, you know what? This was a crummy situation, but here we are. Where are you from, man? What's your life been like? Have you ever been part of a church? These are all actual questions I asked him. And my go-to question, are you from Utah? And if so, what's that been like? And then I got to just talk about my church, my life, talk about God, Share the gospel. The good news. You know? Did I feel like doing that? No, I did not. But I'm telling you, it's the situation I'm in. It's a situation you're in. So redeem it and use it to advance the gospel. Blessings, you guys. I hope you get this video.